We can't innovate. And when we innovate, we are told, and it's interesting, you'll find in Islamic history so far that science and medical science has had a rich history of innovation. But political science, art, music, philosophy has had a very poor history since the 13th and 14th century. And you'll find that that's the same time in which religious innovation stopped, and ijtihad, which in Arabic means critical review of scripture, stopped. And I would caution you that often we get into this game where we want to say, well, there's association with this group and that group. I think associations are important to know who they apologize for and who they don't. But they'll change hats overnight and the association means less. What you need to look at is their ideology. So I'll tell you, as far as I'm concerned, when a mosque starts preaching political science and civic activism and Sharia law, I get very concerned and we either try to change it or we go to a different mosque. But if they talk about the separation of mosque and state, I think they'd be part of the solution. And I think you also need to look for, what is a modern Islam? I think a modern Islam is one led by Muslims that have moral courage to not make exceptions or tell Muslims what they want to hear, but tell them the fact that there are no excuses for there are no excuses for terrorism. It's interesting, Tariq Ramadan, who just did a victory tour around the United States and is continuing to travel around the United States, was recently asked about Imam Awlaki, the radical imam out of Yemen who drove Nidal Hassan to do what he did. And his response, here I'm listening to him thinking, wow, this is sort of the rock star of Western Islam, the grandson of the Muslim Brotherhood founder, by the way. And he hasn't used his platform to reject the ideas of political Islam. When asked about Awlaki, he said, well, you have to realize I wasn't let into the United States, and that could have really, made me estranged to the West, and I'm paraphrasing. And basically, almost it was as if a reap what you sow mentality had happened because America had pushed Awlaki away from us into the Middle East. And I think true leaders would actually say that he's corrupt, he has hijacked our faith for a political movement that's barbaric, and that he should be targeted and either captured and used as a tool to find out where his al-Qaeda connections are, and that assassination would not be wrong because we are in a state of war. And now many may disagree with that, but I think if you're going to effect change in a modern Islam, we need leaders that can confront within the faith community people like that are driving our youth. And it's interesting, groups like MAS now and CARE and others after Fort Hood put up saying we are now going to have counter-radicalization programs and we're going to have websites that drive Muslims away from the bad ones. That's not going to work. If you want to teach kids not to use drugs, you have to give them something else. And our organization, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, the something else is an understanding of liberty. We are devout Muslims. We believe in our faith. We believe in the Quran. But the universe of our human engagement does not revolve around the Quran and Islam. The universe of our human engagement revolves around liberty and the First Amendment and the principles of Western Americanism. And I think until we can do the Brotherhood, developed organizations all over the world based on the spread of a simple booklet by Qutb called Milestones and other booklets that talked about the dominance of political Islam over the West and the recreation of the caliphate. What we need to do to counter that is to harness the resources of the West to create a Muslim liberty movement. And that's what AIFD is doing. We're creating a Muslim liberty project to begin to spread the ideas of Locke and Bastiat and Jefferson about religious freedom to counter political Islam so that Muslims can realize that the most pious Muslims are those that have a choice to wear miniskirts or not, to drink or not drink alcohol, to have a society that's completely open and not sanitized by the clerics. So don't be deceived by Muslims that come up and appear to be congenial and gentlemen and very polite, and yet when they go into the mosques, they're apologists. They say other things about terrorism. They blame the West. They don't take responsibility for the things that they're doing. And I think that it's very important that we look for Muslims that are going to look towards a modern Islam that are actually telling their followers and our community memes, new ideas that can begin to bring us into modernity where we can separate mosque and state, and that we understand that terror is simply a tactic and that there's a goal that these groups are seeking, and that they actually use their bandwidth to work against that goal. And they tell the Awakis of the world that we don't want an Islamic state. We prefer an American state based in freedom and liberty, where there's no establishment of any faith, and Sharia can stay in the ivory towers of your Islamic universities. So with that, I hope we've addressed some of the issues. Thank you.
Well, I'll take my prerogative as moderator. Can you hear all right? Can you hear this? To put a question to each of our speakers and then open it up for a few minutes. First of all, Mr. Kaleem, is there anything in what Dr. Jasser said that you would disagree with, or a different emphasis that you would offer in your, because as I listened to the two speeches and took careful notes from both, it struck me that the interpretation and response to modernity that was at the heart of what Dr. Jasser was calling for was actually demonstrated in some important way by the interpretation you offered of the story of the Prophet Joseph. Nevertheless, I'm aware of an undercurrent, and I'd like to see if we can surface it a bit. What would you say?
Well, I'd like to leave more time for the audience to engage, but I'll just remark on a couple of things. I think I would actually say that I probably agree with maybe 70% of what Dr. Jasser said, but a couple of points that I'd like to pull out to make a comment on. It would seem that Dr. Jasser himself, is not comfortable with having, whether it's political or social or other types of discourse in close quarters with spiritual discourse or in spiritual settings, and that's fine. And I think there's a lot of people who feel that way and don't want to keep the mosque part of their life or their spirituality separate from their politics, and more power to them. I think at the same time, one good thing about America as compared to European secularism is European secularism emphasizes the complete absence of religion in public life, while I think as Americans we're much more comfortable with expressions of faith, or even being forthcoming about what drives your attachment to particular values. And while many of us certainly here in Massachusetts might find a lot to take issue with, for example, the Christian right and what types of politics it informs, but I would be wary of going down the path of saying that interpreting the Establishment Clause to mean that we should be preventing expressions of faith in the public sphere, or preventing people from being comfortable in expressing that their views on social justice issues or politics are arrived at from faith, or feeling that a church or a mosque or a synagogue that preaches on social justice issues or political issues is somehow creating a pool of radicals by doing that.
What's the role of Sharia, if I may ask a question? My point is about Sharia. In a Muslim majority society, where should Sharia be in government?
That's one of the things where I agree with you. I think that there should never be a coming together of powers, military, political, and legislative. I think those, and religious, the political, legislative arm, within them there should be separation. I think we've actually arrived upon a very wonderful system of checks and balances here in the U.S. I'd like to see that exported to Muslim majority, not exported. I'd like to see that evolve in Muslim majority countries. I'd like to, and I would be